Hi everyone, my name is Katie and I'll be the host for tonight's masterclass. Today we are introducing Brad Hahn, and he has a lot to share about entrepreneurship and nonprofit organizations within Buffalo. So I leave it up to you. Please give a warm welcome.
All right. Thanks so much for having me. And it's my pleasure to be here and share a little bit of my story and the story of Explore Buffalo, the organization where I am the executive director and also one of the founders, and where I've been for about 12 years. So I'm happy to share our story and hopefully see you on an Explore Buffalo tour if you haven't already taken one. We have lots of great things coming this summer, as we do all year round. So Explore Buffalo's mission, which I put up here on the screen, is to promote Buffalo and Western York history, architecture, and neighborhoods through education to learners of all ages. And we accomplish that primarily through a variety of tours that we offer to our community and to local residents here in Western New York, visitors from around the world, K through 12 students, college students, and many others. So I'll be talking more about how we got into that, how this all started, and how I became a part of it as we go through. So I am a UB graduate, so I graduated in 2013 with a bachelor's degree, triple major, political science, English, and geography. How each of those majors all got piled on top of each other is a story for a different time, I'm sure. While I was a student at UB, I became a volunteer docent. A docent is essentially a tour guide here in Buffalo with a different organization that was doing walking tours around our city. And I grew up here in the Buffalo area, specifically in Williamsville. I've always loved the city of Buffalo and found its buildings, especially, to really be fascinating. And when I was a kid growing up, even as young as elementary school, I loved going downtown. And we would go downtown as a kid for hockey games and theater and things like that. And the buildings around downtown were almost what interested me more than the show or the game or like that. So when I saw an opportunity in 2011 to become a volunteer and lead some tours of Buffalo, I thought this was great. So like many college sophomores, I really enjoyed the opportunity to get up every Saturday morning for a 9 a.m. Class from January through April to become a volunteer docent. And that summer in 2011, I started leading tours of Buffalo. And that fall, Buffalo hosted a conference called the National Historic Preservation Conference, which was a really big deal. About 2,500 people came to Buffalo to look at our old buildings. And that was sort of front and center for, I was volunteering with Preservation Buffalo Niagara at the time. And that really both brought a lot of people here to Buffalo to admire our historic buildings, but it also really woke up a lot of people here in Buffalo to the exciting buildings, the fantastic buildings that we have here. And people saw, hey, there are thousands of people coming from across the country to Buffalo to check out our old buildings. We want to see them too. And so a couple of years later, in 2013, there was a group of volunteers who really felt that there was an opportunity and a need within our city to establish an organization that would really promote tours and to really focus just on tours. At that time, the tour program was part of the preservation organization, and there was some tension within the organization about where the focus was, where the growth was going to happen, things like that. And so this group of volunteers, including me, decided that Buffalo, we believed, could support and deserved and needed a organization that was really just focused on promoting the city through high quality tours. So some other cities across the country have similar organizations. For example, there's a great group in Boston called Boston by Foot. They've been doing this for about 50 years now. And there's a fantastic organization in Chicago, the Chicago Architecture Foundation, similar focus really just on telling the city's stories through great tours. And so this organization got started at the end of 2013. I've been with it since the beginning, and 12 years later, I'm still here. So I'm going to tell a little bit of the details of that story. But today, Explore Buffalo, I mentioned some of those other cities, those other organizations. Over those 12 years, Explore Buffalo has grown to become the second largest nonprofit tour group in America after that group in Chicago. And Chicago is quite a bit larger. They have thousands and thousands of tours every year for hundreds of thousands of people. And so I don't think we're going to catch up to them anytime soon, but we have actually grown to be larger than some of the other cities that have longer running tour programs. So we're really proud of that. And I'll sort of talk about how that has happened. And where that has happened across our city. But it's important to recognize that we really started small. So when Explore Buffalo began, we were essentially a startup. We didn't have a pile of money in the bank or anything like that to work from. And while everyone involved had led tours in some capacity, this was a brand new venture. We did get some seed money from volunteers who were passionate about doing this, and people either loaned or gave money to start the organization, to just kind of get things started. And so we rented our first office, which is in First Presbyterian Church, the church that you see there on the right. The office that we rented was 90 square feet, and it cost $90 a month. And that small office is now actually back to its rightful purpose as a closet. So not a whole lot of room there, but there was a room for a desk and one employee who was me. And we got to use the church's copier and the church's Wi-Fi. So it was a pretty low budget way to get started and just have a physical presence, have an office. This is long before remote work and all that sort of thing became trendy, really. And something we also really didn't have the resources for. Up until this point, the sort of the way things worked for tours, particularly here in Buffalo, walking tours, was that a calendar would be prepared for the entire year in January and February of every tour that was going to be offered for the entire rest of the year through December. And this would be printed in this massive brochure. I still have a few of them. And that meant that the calendar for the year was really locked in February or March, somewhere thereabouts. And then 100 or 150,000 of these brochures would be printed and distributed all over the city. And that was the program. That's what it was for the summer. You couldn't take anything off. You couldn't add anything because that brochure was what we were doing. And we didn't have the money to print 100,000 copies of a brochure with a tour calendar. And we also weren't exactly certain, like, okay, what is going to be popular? What are people going to want to do? What tours are they going to want to take? And so we invested instead the resources we did have into building as good a website as we could with the calendar and everything there, with the flexibility that we could add more dates. So if we saw a tour was popular, we could schedule more of them. If we saw a tour was not really as popular, we could scale that back. And that has been our process ever since then. And it has really freed us up, really from that initial sort of resource crunch of not being able to pay for a calendar brochure. That has really freed us up to, I think, be a lot more successful and more flexible and adapt more to the market, what people are interested in, because we every month add tours, we scale back some tours, and a lot of that is based on what we're seeing, what the audience is reacting to. But again, we really started small that first year in 2014. I was the only employee, and we had a core group of about 25, 30 volunteers. We believed in it, we were passionate about it, but we were also uncertain exactly how things were going to go, and if this was going to be a viable business. And even though we are a nonprofit, it is, at the end of the day, we have bills to pay, so we have to generate income. And we had prepared for a potential partner funder sort of opportunity, what we thought was a realistic budget for that first year in 2014, where we thought we could realistically generate about $75,000, $80,000 in income from tours, from some donations, things like that. And by the end of the year, we had generated well over $100,000 in income. So we really exceeded our own expectations within year one. So that led into 2015. And again, I was the only employee in 2014. And by the end of 2014, I really had not taken much, if any, time off during that year. So 2015, the first 2 or 3 weeks, I think, of January, it was like, okay, I need a vacation. It's time for a break. And we had developed plans to start a speaker series in January, late January, heading into February and March of 2015, with the basically the belief we needed to stay in people's minds, that we couldn't just go totally dormant for 5 or 6 months of the year. So we needed to be doing something to keep people interested. And so we said, okay, let's do a speaker series. And so we scheduled that to start in late January. I was on vacation and we thought, okay, maybe we'll get 30, 40 people will show up for this. And we plan to have it in one of the rooms in the church where our office was. And there's a number of rooms where you can have 30, 40 people. That's no problem. I went away on vacation and people were registering for this while I was away. I came back and the registration for the speaker series had already crossed 100 people. And we ended up with 191 people showed up for that speaker series. So again, it really showed that people were hungry. They were interested. They wanted something to do in the winter, even though it meant having to leave their house and come into the city and find a place to park. They wanted what we were selling, literally. That winter, we also ran our first new docent class where we recruited new docents to join us and tell the city stories. And again, we had a group of about 25, 30 or so volunteer docents who were in the founding group. And we thought we'd be happy if we got 10 new docents, would have been great. And we had one of our largest classes that we've in fact ever had, with over 30 people in that class. And so we really started to see there's a lot of momentum here of people being excited about Buffalo and these buildings and these neighborhoods and exploring, literally. I think that, one of the keys to success in Explore Buffalo's name is that very active name that, we're Explore Buffalo. It doesn't sort of sound like a historic type of thing. It sounds like we're active, we're going out, we're engaging people in the community. We started in 2015 also a membership program. And this has really been, I think, one of the most successful things that we have done in our organization's entire history. So the Explorer Pass membership, essentially pre-membership, every tour was $10 or $15, something like that. And you would have to pay per tour. And with the membership, you pay one fee, which today is $65 for an individual, 100 for a couple for a dual level. Originally, it was $50 for an individual, 75 for a dual or a family level. And you can take as many of our walking tours, those tours that have been $10 or $15, you can take as many walking tours as you want with that membership for the entire year. So what that really meant was that our attendance went way up because these people who joined as members, they were taking a lot more tours, because individually you might not at first glance, think, okay, I'm going to spend $10 on a tour this week, $15 on a tour next week or next month, and over and over and over again. And you may not necessarily say, oh, this neighborhood I've never heard of, or this street I'm not familiar with. I'm not going to spend $15 to take a tour of that. I'll spend 15 on a tour of the mansions on Delaware or something like that. But these sort of unheard of places, probably not. With a membership, we get that money up front, and it works out to, generally, if you take about 3, 4 tours, something like that, the membership is paid for. And what we really saw became very successful with the membership was all these tours of the more sort of obscure places of Buffalo, neighborhoods that people were not as familiar with. They started to sort of branch out and take these memberships, just take these tours with their membership as just something to do. And so that membership really has led to the success of a lot of our neighborhood tours all across the city of Buffalo and all across Erie County, a lot of the different villages where we now do tours, different theme tours, things like that, where, again, if the tickets were all paid tickets, where it was $10 or $20 or whatever it is for that tour, they probably wouldn't get as many people. But when it's a perk with the membership, we have seen that really help to boost the attendance all throughout our tours. And it also generates a really sustainable source of income for Explore Buffalo that we are really, it's important to our annual budget. So also in 2015, we were excited. I was no longer the only employee. We hired two new employees, and obviously we did not fit in that 90 square foot office. So we moved into a new office within the church, and First Presbyterian has been our home since we started, and we're still there today. So in 2016, we began winter tours, which was kind of a venture that we thought was important. That again, we didn't want to just totally close up for the winter. So 2016 is when we started running tours year round, much fewer in the winter than during the summer, but again, it was part of a effort to make sure that people knew that we're still busy, we're still active, and as long as the weather isn't totally terrible, we actually do pretty well in the winter as well because people want to get out, want to do something. In 2017, we also received our own 501c3, which is an interesting and important part of Explore Buffalo's story too. So when we were getting started, Explore Buffalo was organized as part of another nonprofit, which was essentially our fiscal sponsor. And that organization was called the Wellness Institute of Greater Buffalo. And it was sort of a parent organization for us and for several other, actually many other organizations in our community today. For example, Go Bike Buffalo has a similar story where they essentially began as part of the Wellness Institute of Buffalo and then grew to a point where it made sense for them to become their own organization. So as a part of the Wellness Institute of Buffalo, we operated under their 501c3 status as a tax-exempt organization. So we didn't have to worry about that right from the beginning, which for anyone who is familiar with nonprofits or is interested in nonprofits, the 501c3 process is somewhat arduous, somewhat time-consuming, paperwork and so forth, and not really the thing that we wanted to really be spending a lot of time on in the first, startup moments. Really want to be focused on the program and the tours and getting this organization going. So it was really helpful to us to be part of that other organization, and they handled things, our insurance, our payroll, all that's kind of like administrative back-end type of things. They handled that for us so that we could, like I said, really focus on the programs and the tours and the mission instead of that important, but not as really exciting kind of things on the administrative side. But by 2017, we had grown to the point where it really made a lot more sense to become our own 501c3. So we did file that paperwork, worked with lawyers and so forth to make that happen. And we accomplished that in 2017. Another really important part of the Wellness Institute was really the mentorship and the guidance from the Wellness Institute, particularly their executive director, Phil Haberstroh, who has since passed, but was a really important mentor to me and to Explore Buffalo as we got started. Even after 2017, I would, visit him somewhat regularly and just have a chat about how things were going and what suggestions or guidance, things like that he could offer. In 2019, we took a really big step for our organization and began Doors Open Buffalo, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes in one of the next slides. And also in 2019, we were really excited. Buffalo Spree added a new category. The magazine has an annual poll called the Best of Western New York, where you get to vote on the best tours in Western best tours and also best restaurants and all sorts of different categories. And they hadn't had a best tours category before, but they decided to add one in 2019, and we won it that year and have won it every year since. And actually, the voting is currently open. So by all means, head to Buffalo Spree's website and you can vote in their poll. So a question that came in that I saw through the chat: what were the determining factors that made us know it was time to branch off and get your own 501c3? So a couple of things on that. So part of it was purely financial. So with the sponsorship arrangement, the fiscal sponsor arrangement with the Wellness Institute, we paid them 10% of our gross income for all the services that they provided. And so we did the math in somewhere late 2016, something like that, and basically said, okay, if we do these things on our own, if we do our own accounting and insurance and payroll processing and things like that. What's that going to cost versus what is the 10% that we are paying to the Wellness Institute? And I don't remember the exact dollar amounts either way, but essentially we could save money. It would actually cost us less to do these things on our own rather than at that point paying that 10% to the Wellness Institute. The other piece of it was really more that we had grown to the point that we wanted to have full control of those functions at that point. I mean, as a real startup at the initial point in 2014, it was fantastic to have that handled by someone else. But by 2000, late 2016 into 2017, we wanted to have more control of it. We wanted to make sure that we had a succession. So if something happened with the Wellness Institute, there were concerns that we didn't really know where Explore Buffalo would land if anything happened with Phil and with the Wellness Institute. So we wanted to make sure that we were, not going to have any impact if anything happened to the Wellness Institute. So those are the two main reasons why we decided to get our own 501c3 at that point. So here's a chart of our annual attendance. So we grew from about 6,200 in 2014. We nearly doubled to over 13,000 in 2015, and really just continued this upward climb to just over 25,000 people in 2019. Then, of course, we had a little thing happened in 2020 where the attendance plummeted, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides as well. But we're now back above the 2019 had been the previous peak, and we exceeded that actually by far in 2024. So 2024's attendance crossed 28,000 people who attended a tour or program with Explore Buffalo. So just to give a little bit of an overview of much of what we do. So today we offer over 100 different tours and programs. So the most visible thing that we do are our public tours, particularly our walking tours. So in 2024, our docents led 2,093 scheduled tours. And a lot of that are walking tours downtown. If you're downtown on a summer day, you're probably going to at some point see one of our walking tour groups somewhere in downtown. You'll see them on Delaware Avenue, a lot of the different city neighborhoods. We have tours of pretty much every city neighborhood today, West Side, East Side, Hurdle Avenue, South Buffalo, everywhere in between, as well as tours of a number of our city landmarks. And the most popular, most frequent tour that we run is the City Hall tour that we do every weekday at noon, where we run a free tour, free 1 hour tour of Buffalo City Hall, which is an Art Deco landmark. It's an absolute gem of a building, and that tour alone, more than 3,000 people attended in 2024, so an average of about 14 people per day. We also do tours of the grain elevators at Silos City. We do tours of historic churches and sacred spaces, Kleinhans Music Hall, and more. And we do a lot of these tours for groups and for school groups as well as college groups. So that's an important piece of our operation that you don't really see when you go to our website. Like you'll see there's a page about information about field trips and things like that. But that's of course never on our public calendar. So if you go to our website and look at the calendar and you see, oh, there's a lot of tours, we're actually doing a lot more tours than what's on the calendar because of all the tours that we do that are for private groups, for schools and groups like that. We also do education programs. We have a speaker series that I mentioned that continues, although that is now entirely on Zoom since the pandemic. And we also have a guest speaker program where our docents will go and deliver a presentation to organizations, libraries, and classes and things like that. So a question that I see here in the chat, what was the consideration when choosing to be a nonprofit organization instead of a for-profit one? So that's a really great question. I will say it never really, I wouldn't say it didn't come up, but it was always pretty much a foregone conclusion that we would be a nonprofit organization and not a for-profit one. So the sort of pure organizations in other cities are nonprofits, and the organizations that our volunteers had been working with before had been and are nonprofit organizations as well. And really, the whole business model would be very different if we were a for-profit um, organization. So if we were a for-profit organization, and there are some for-profit tour companies, certainly in other cities. There are many of them. There are a few in Buffalo as well. They're much smaller. The challenge with the for-profit is in that case, you're paying the tour guides, you're paying the docents. And, um, that was kind of the starting point with Explore Buffalo was a group of volunteers. They wanted to volunteer. They weren't really interested or looking to be paid to do this. And from a business perspective, um, it would be very difficult to do what we do if the docents, if the tour guides were paid. And that's something we're able to do is to keep the cost really low. In particular for groups like schools, we do a lot of tours that are free. For example, that tour of City Hall. We do tours for school groups, things like that, which are really reasonably priced for those school groups. And if we had to pay all of our volunteers for every tour that we're doing, again, that's, last year we had about 2,100 scheduled tours. And if we were paying, each of them is, let's say, 2 hours, so that's 4,200 hours times $20 even per hour um, per volunteer. That becomes 80 some thousand dollars right there, and it really would really change kind of the whole character of the organization. Um, we our volunteers, I think one of the reasons that they are so good and that they excel at what they do is because they want to do it. They are passionate about doing it. It's not, quote, just a job for them. Not that there's anything wrong with being paid as a tour guide, but I think it's a very different experience when you have someone who is just giving their time willingly to lead a tour versus someone who's doing it just because they want to earn that $20 an hour, whatever it might be. So that's the main sort of background of why we went with the nonprofit. Like I said, it wasn't really I don't remember exactly. We probably talked about it at some point, um, but right from the start, it had always been really based on our experience already, a plan to be a nonprofit organization. But a really great question. So our summer tour season, which we're heading into now, like I mentioned, we have a really busy calendar and run about 300 tours per month. And that includes the public and the private tours. And most of our tour guests are from Western New York, especially those ExploraPass members. And so while we do get visitors from around the country, around the world even, the majority of people who take a tour with us are from Western New York, and that's really become something we're really good at, is getting people here in Western New York to take tours of their own backyard, whether it's literally their own neighborhood of somebody taking a tour, who lives in Williamsville taking a tour of Williamsville, or maybe venturing a town over and taking a tour of I don't know, Kenmore or Clarence or something. And so that's something that we've really excelled, has become something we're really good at, is getting people here in Western New York to be excited about touring other places and buildings and so forth here in their own community. So a couple of questions here in this chat question, so I'll take them in pieces. So first part, so we're all making money from tours when under the fiscal sponsorship. So yes, so when we were part of the Wellness Institute of Greater Buffalo, that 2014 to 2017 period, we were making money from the tours. They were generating income, and a portion of that income, so 10% of it, went back to the Wellness Institute, and then the remainder went to all the other functions, including our own salaries and things like that for the staff, just the general operating costs of the organization. Were you able to apply for grants even though you weren't your own official nonprofit yet? So that's actually another good question, another good point, and something I'd actually somewhat forgotten about. But that was another reason why we eventually decided to become our own 501(c)(3). Was some grant organizations, some funders allowed you to apply for a grant or receive a grant if you were that fiscally sponsored, but many did not. And there are some even who require 3-year history of 990s, which is the federal tax return for a nonprofit organization. So even once we got our own 501(c)(3), we still had to have a 3-year history as our own nonprofit before we could apply for certain funders. So that was also a piece of why we decided um, to um, to become our own 501(c)(3). So good question there. And how did you all start to pay yourselves? So in terms of the salaries for the staff, so all the staff are salaried, so it's not including me, so that's not something that's necessarily directly dependent on how much tour income or something like that. It's not a percentage basis, although obviously we need to make money from the tours to pay the staff salary and wages. And so, I will say that at the very beginning of the organization, in the first 6 months or so, when it was really, um, you know, we were unsure of, is this going to fly? Is this going to take off? How are we going to do? We didn't have a whole lot of money in the bank. And so I worked for, very little. So I think it was $10 an hour or something like that for the first 6 months or so of the organization. And that was back when $10 an hour was still above the minimum wage, believe it or not. And anyway, so by about 6 months in, we realized, okay, we actually are, um, this is viable and we're generating income. So the organization, the board, actually said, okay, we can pay Brad a more respectable sort of living wage. I was, for that point, actually still living with my parents in Williamsville and still on their health insurance and stuff like that. So there are advantages to that, certainly. So, and then again, by that point, sort of 6 months or so in, the organization was able to, pay a more reasonable rate for that. So, and that's still the case today, that the organization, supports the staff, and that's an important part of the organization, is ensuring that the staff are, um, reasonably compensated. I mean, nobody's getting rich or wealthy or anything like that from Explore Buffalo. But we also have really low staff turnover. So it's been almost 3 years now since one of our full-time employees left. And part of that is because, we pay a fair salary to our staff. Nobody's making minimum wage. We want to make sure that everybody is, able to support themselves on what they're earning at Explore Buffalo. So those are great questions. All right. So like I mentioned, all of our tours are led by volunteer docents, and this is really really key to the success of Explore Buffalo is our docents and the passion and the knowledge that they bring. These are people who they spend hours and hours and days, weeks, months, doing additional research on the tours and the neighborhood that they do their tours and the houses and buildings and so forth that are on their tours. So that is, when we look at the feedback and the reviews and things like that from our guests or people who take the tours over and over again, it's really the docent who makes the tour experience. And so we couldn't do what we do without our fantastic volunteer docents. So I mentioned I would talk a little bit about Doors Open Buffalo, and this is our sort of signature annual event. It's our largest program. It's nearly a fifth of our annual attendance comes in one day at Doors Open Buffalo. So Doors Open is an event concept that is seen in other cities. And so we have seen that. I have seen it going to other cities, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Milwaukee, and Toronto, and others. And so, we saw the the potential of Doors Open Buffalo, and so we wanted to bring that here to Buffalo. And Doors Open is essentially a day of free public access to to historic buildings, to architectural landmarks, to really get people excited, and especially to get people um, who have not taken a tour with us, and maybe they're not interested or don't want to, or whatever the reason is. The concept of a 90-minute guided walking tour is not appealing to them. But Doors Open is sort of a choose your own adventure where we have generally 30 to 40 buildings downtown open for visitors to explore, and you can go to one building. So if you just want to go to City Hall, it is the one day a year that City Hall is open, and you can go to the observation deck and tour City Hall. You can just go to one building and do that. You can try to go to all 30 some buildings, although that's pretty hard and we don't really recommend it. And if you want to spend an hour or two in one building, you can. If you want to spend 10 minutes in one building, you can. So it's a very, like I said, choose your own adventure, free flowing event that is open to whatever the guest, the user wants to do. So some of our goals through this have been to increase the participation of historically underrepresented communities in Buffalo, and to get more families to attend and get more children involved in it, appreciating Buffalo history and architecture. And so a piece of that is that the event is free for everyone. So it's funded by grants and sponsors. And so it's just a great day. And this year it'll be on Saturday, September 20th. So last year we had about 5,300 people come downtown to Doors Open Buffalo to attend the event. And we're hoping to have even more. So we get great reviews of this, and it's really a great positive day for the city, for downtown, for Buffalo, and for Explore Buffalo as well. And so, like I said, we see about 20% of our annual attendance in one single day. We have been making progress on getting more families, getting children to participate in Doors Open, which we really love to see. And again, that's a demographic that realistically is a family with a couple young kids. Are they going to come on a 90-minute walking tour of downtown? Probably not. But knowing that they can come to Doors Open and they can pick which buildings they want to go to. We have a family-friendly trail that we highlight specific buildings that are, we think, great for families to visit. And so we've really been able to make some progress on getting more families into Doors Open. Last year, we also added a quiet hour. So we wanted to increase our outreach to families and others with sensory sensitivity needs. And so we added an hour before the event that is specifically for people with sensory sensitivity needs to come, a lot less people, and enjoy the buildings in a much quieter way. That was really successful as well. So I did see another question come through, so I will take a look at that. So as a founder, were you also a board member from the beginning? So no, I have never been a board member, so that is, I wouldn't say unique, but something I think that some nonprofit organizations do struggle with, especially the startups and sort of founders. So I certainly believe that a staff of the organization should not be a board member. So the board of directors is essentially my boss. So our board members are currently have 19, and we've generally had somewhere between about 13 to 19, 20 or so board members. And so, they're the ultimate decision makers for the organization. Legally, they are responsible for the organization in the eyes of New York State, the federal government, and everyone else. So even though I run the organization on a day-to-day basis, the board at the end of the day is fully responsible for the organization. So the board, does not, and especially these days, which is something that we've worked on, does not micromanage me, and they, let me run the organization on a day-to-day basis, and is there to support and to provide more guidance and big picture kind of strategy, instead of, getting into the details of specific tours and volunteers and things like that and events. And so that kind of leads into the second question about how is the board able to improve itself over time. So an important piece of that for our organization to understand, which is certainly unique to us, is that initially, as the organization was set up, all of our board members were volunteer docents, and that came out of our founding. And so our board members were very involved. They were very passionate, which was fantastic. They were super committed to the organization, but that also really made it very difficult for our board to, for best term is to quote, stay out of the weeds. So our board meetings would often really devolve into very minutia of the organization that really is not sort of the territory of a board. And that has evolved, that has changed as the organization has grown, as we've added staff who are really able to take on a lot of these programs and things like that. Um, and it's also changed as the board has changed. So our board, and something I think we have done really well with, again, in comparison to some other nonprofit organizations, they're well intentioned, but we have bylaws, we follow them, and that includes term limits. So our board members have a maximum, they're 3-year terms, maximum of um, 2 3-year terms. There was a little bit of flexibility with some of the founding members who ended up doing like 7 or 8 years just because we wanted to stagger the terms of the board. But we have never had a board member who does more than 8 years. And so at this point, 12 years in, we have had a full turnover. So there's nobody on our board who was on the board at the beginning of the organization. So everyone who's been on our board, we've had fantastic board members, but boards need to turn over. They need change. You cannot have the same people on the board for a life appointment. And well, it may seem easy. It's really detrimental, I believe, to the organization to have the same people on the board in perpetuity. So that, like I said, I think has been really important to us. It's been, I'd say painful, but there are some founding members who are very passionate about it and had a little trouble maybe, stepping back. But at the same time, it was so important to the organization to bring in new board members with new perspective, new connections, new ideas, and to do that in a staggered fashion. So it wasn't just like one year. It was like, okay, all the founders are gone. We've got a whole new group of people. But it's been, it's staggered fashion where every year we have a couple board members rotate off, a couple board members rotate in. So you have that continuity and that institutional memory, but you also are bringing in fresh ideas, fresh perspectives each year. So I mentioned COVID. So COVID was a real challenge for us. And so tours, are basically our entire business model is the concept of bringing strangers together to spend a couple hours with each other and breathe on each other, essentially. And so all of our tours stopped in March of 2020. And we were able to move like our speaker series and things like that online, which, Explore Buffalo prior to March 15th or something, 2020, we didn't have a Zoom account. We'd never used Zoom before, but we learned. And our docents were really fantastic and flexible and willing to adapt. And we were able to fortunately resume our tours with some restrictions in July of 2020 ahead of a lot of the other cultural organizations because we were able to consider ourselves a quote outdoor recreation amenity or something like that instead of a arts and museum type thing, which we are. So we were open ahead of the museums in Buffalo and New York, things like that. So our tours we ran were outdoor only. We limited it to 8 people, I believe. Masks were required. And I was like, okay, are people going to show up and take a tour in the summer when they have to wear a mask for 90 minutes? Because we still didn't really know exactly how COVID spread or whatever. And people did. And our outdoor tours did really well that summer. What we saw was that people really valued the opportunity to connect with each other, to have this sort of shared community or experience where, again, there was no festivals, there was no theater, there were no sports games that you could go to. Going on a tour was honestly one of the rare things that you could do that was, quote, sort of normal. And so our organization, we had much reduced attendance because of the capacity limits. We weren't doing any indoor tours. Bus tours were obviously unthinkable. You're basically in a can for 3 hours with people. School groups, none of that was happening, but the public outdoor tours really did very well. People were really appreciative, and it really kind of demonstrated our value of why what we do is so important that we are bringing people together. So fortunately, we were able to receive a lot of grants and generous donations that really sustained the organization through that really difficult time. I would say the most difficult time in our organization's history. So 2024, I mentioned visitors come from across the country. So we've got the states in blue are states where visitors came from. I don't know if we've ever had somebody from North Dakota take a tour. It's a continuous thing I want to work on. On the right are the top visitor zip codes by the percentage of our total attendance. So 9% of our total attendance in 2024 came from 14221, the Williamsville zip code. So those 11 zip codes there total about 43% of our total attendance. You can see they're all here in Western New York, all in the Buffalo area, city of Buffalo and its suburbs. So looking at kind of a breakdown of our tour attendance. So the public tours are the biggest category on their own. That includes all of the walking tours, bus tours, city hall tours, things like that. And then there's the group tours, Doors Open Buffalo, our speaker programs, and then just other, which we do a whole lot of other things. We have our own trivia series and things like that. And it all adds up. Like I said, last year we had over 28,000 people learn about Buffalo, become more appreciative of Buffalo history and architecture through what we do. So I've mentioned this before. So the business side of it's really important and not something that, everyone really thinks about with our tour organization. A lot of people see, oh, okay, you've got volunteers leading the tour, and obviously they're volunteers, they're not being paid. And so why do I need to pay for a tour? And there's a lot that goes into an organization that a lot of people don't think of. So, and the tour income itself is only about 25%. So that's the sort of on the income graph, the right side, the upper right quadrant of it. Our Explorer Pass memberships generate another 15-ish%. And then our events, which is primarily our annual gala and our Twilight Tour of Mansions, which is coming up this year on June 11th, when you can go inside a bunch of the beautiful mansions on Delaware Avenue. That's about another 20% of our income. But that still leaves a big chunk of our budget to, be supported by individual donations, which is people writing a check or making a donation online, as well as grants and sponsors. So our largest single grant that we receive each year is from New York State's Council on the Arts. We also have generous corporate sponsors led by M&T Bank and other funders. And so what that supports on the expense side, you can see the biggest expense is our staff. And so we have a terrific staff. And like I said earlier, they are really important to the success of the organization, to have a staff that is ongoing, that is really good at what they do. And it doesn't have a lot of turnover. There are nonprofits in Buffalo where the turnover rate is just endless. And I'm really happy that we are not like that. And so, when our volunteers have something they need help with, they want to be able to send an email, pick up the phone, talk to somebody, have that resolved quickly. When a guest or a member calls and has a question about a tour, they want to call and talk to somebody. And so that, is somebody who's in our office and they're answering the phone, or emails or Facebook messages or the website chat thing on our website, things like that. And so in order to be responsive to all those different groups, we have to have a great team, and unfortunately we do. We also have other expenses, things like our marketing budget. So we spend about $30,000 a year on advertising. Sounds like a lot of money, but that goes really, really quickly when one of our big advertising spends is we run ads in the B newspapers, which are great. They reach a lot of the suburban communities. And so, that alone, this year, the B newspapers. We run full page ads because they really make an impression. We'll probably spend, and they have 9 B newspapers around the Buffalo area. So we'll spend probably about a third of our marketing budget just on newspaper ads. We can't even touch billboards. TV is kind of largely out of reach, things like that. So, marketing's expensive, but it's important to reach people and tell them what we're doing. But then there's all the other things like insurance. So it costs us about $15,000 a year to have insurance on all of our tours and cover that. Card fees. So, that 3% credit card fee. So that's just watching, 3% of our total income each year, more or less, just kind of going straight out the window. So, it adds up. So really what I do, what we do at Explore Buffalo is, it's a balancing act. And there's all these different stakeholders and constituents that are all really important to the organization and all have to be in as close of balance and harmony as I can make them, although that is never exactly a perfect science. But I always try to stress and make it, important and memorable that, at the end of the day, it's the audience, it's the public who is, the most important in terms of these stakeholders. Because if nobody's taking our tours, then, it doesn't matter if we have fantastic volunteers who can lead these tours if nobody's taking them. So that's why it's important to make sure that our tours are designed and marketed in such a way that they are compelling and interesting to the audience, and that the audience really enjoys the experience. That's why we've done things. For example, we did a survey where we asked people, what's your preferred length of a tour? Because some of our volunteers love to give a 2-hour tour. Well, 76% of our audience in that survey said, I want a 90-minute tour. I don't want anything over a 90-minute tour. Only 11% said they want a 2-hour tour. And 13% even said they want a 1-hour tour. So having that data to go to our volunteers and say, look, you may want to do a 2-hour tour, but that's not what our audience wants. At 90 minutes, they're done. They want to move on. They want to go have lunch, whatever. And so we really have to remember our audience, but also our volunteers, like I said, are so important to this organization. And that's why we do a lot for our volunteers with social events and a summer picnic and a holiday party and things like that, so that our volunteers are engaged and appreciated and connected with the organization. Because we see that if a volunteer comes in and they take our training and then they come to these events, then they are much more likely to stay and continue being a volunteer in the future if they're engaged and they come to these different events. So our volunteers, we do a docent training class every winter. So we just finished this up. So it's a 10-week class, mostly in person, although post-COVID, we now do a couple of the classes on Zoom. So it was 7 weeks in person, 3 weeks on Zoom, and they learn one specific tour, one of our downtown walking tours to start, because it's really an important place to begin as a new docent, is to learn that sort of downtown core. And so they do presentations every week so that by the end of those 10 weeks, they're really familiar with downtown in general, their tour, and specifically in the buildings on that tour. And the training wraps up where they have to do what we call a graduation tour, where they lead a full tour start to finish for one of our experienced docents, and they can have an audience, friends, family, whatever. And that's really our single greatest check on tour quality, because we want to make sure, when somebody does that graduation tour, they're out there, they're giving the tour on behalf of Explore Buffalo. They've got our lanyard and our badge on, and we want to make sure that the tour that somebody who just graduated our docent class is taking is every bit as good as somebody who has been doing tours for 10 years. And so it's really important that that graduation tour be an excellent tour. So it's not a foregone conclusion. It's not a guarantee to pass it. If somebody needs work, we will tell them that. We'll work with them to make sure they get to the point of being able to do a really good tour. What does my day-to-day look like? So that is a good question. So every day is different. That's one of the reasons I'm still here. My days usually involve a lot of emails, so I am essentially a professional emailer, scheduler, calendar sort of person. I don't even want to know how many emails I send and receive every day. Scary number. But an important piece for me, of my job is talking with people, being in the community, going and meeting with people, organizations, going on our tours. So right now, for example, we're doing the previews of all of our new walking tours for the 2025 season. So when a docent wants to create a tour, they have to um, present that tour to me and a group of other docents, start to finish, kind of like that graduation tour, sort of like a dress rehearsal of it to make sure that this tour is up to our standards, up to snuff, is good to go. So I've done, 5 or 6 of those over um, the last week or two, which also gives me a lot of familiarity with the product, which is really the tours are our product. Um, I spend a fair amount of time in meetings, although I try to avoid them whenever possible. We have a weekly team meeting, which is important to our team. Our staff gets together every Wednesday morning. I have a one-on-one with most of my staff, 20, 30 minutes at the most, usually each week. Committee meetings, I try to not have as many. For example, something like our board meeting. Our board used to meet every month, and it was becoming clear we were just meeting for the sake of having a meeting. So now our board meets generally every other month. But again, the day to day, it changes each day, each week, each season. This is a really, really busy time of year as we get the tour season going, as we've got events like our Child Approved Mansions coming around the corner in June. Our new docents are finishing their graduation tours. So this is, as an organization and for me, a really busy time because at the end of the day, my job is largely making sure that everybody is in the right place doing the right thing at the right time. And so that comes down to a very detailed calendar and a whole lot of emails. So if anybody ever wants to come and visit, by all means, stop in and say hi. So I know I'm running up on the time limit here, so just to wrap up, so a few lessons. So like I said, some things are going to work out, some things will not, and it's okay to stop something that isn't working. So we have tried many tours. Many of them work out very well. Some of them are just a dud. The audience isn't interested and we drop them. Some of them start out great. And then we decide, okay, they're no longer serving our mission and doing well. So great example of that. In 2014 or 15, we started a brewery bus tour because the craft breweries were becoming a trendy thing in Buffalo. They were opening a number of them in the city at that time. And so we started a bus tour to talk about the history of brewing in Buffalo, going back to the 1800s, and also visit some of these new breweries. And it was a really popular tour because you got beer samples along the way. And it was a popular tour, a profitable tour. It was great. But then the tour kind of started to evolve, and the audience started to change, and it became much more of a transportation mechanism from to and from 4 breweries over the course of an afternoon. So when people started to ask, "Oh, can I bring beer on the bus?" Which most of the breweries are 5 or 10 minutes away. When we started to get, bachelorette parties, not there's anything wrong with a bachelorette party, but that's not really our target demographic for our brewery tour. So, we weren't making as much money as we had originally because the breweries were charging more for the samples. And it was really clear that this was not meeting our mission. So we decided to end that tour. And some people were like, "What? How can you give up the brewery tour? People want to take it." It's like, yeah, but it's not exactly, it's not really fulfilling our mission. So also focus on your strengths and growth. Growth for the sake of growth isn't necessarily a good thing. So you have opportunities to potentially expand and do things that we have said no to because it didn't really fit our mission. The partnership or whatever was proposed didn't really fit our mission, didn't fit our organizational culture, and didn't sometimes fit our capacity. So we have said no to things, and that's okay. I think it's really important too to rely on others for help with their areas of expertise. So when it comes to all sorts of, there are so many talented people in every profession, craft, trade, whatever. Um, so, I am not a website designer. I will not pretend to be a website designer. So when we need to do something on the website, we have a website designer, and yes, we have to pay them, and yes, that's fair. We have a lawyer, we have an accountant, we have a great payroll company, all these different things that, that's their expertise. And so I think it's really important that, we work with people who are able to do that. So, um, so a couple questions here. So, did any private companies copy your organization's tour ideas? Um, Not really. So, private tour companies, we really haven't seen. Again, there are a few of them, and there are some great tours. For example, there's the Buffalo River History Cruise along the Buffalo River. But when it comes to walking tours, I think there's a pretty clear either realization or um, understanding that hey, there's not a whole lot of money to be made in walking tours in general and or in Buffalo. Um, it's not on its own something that one person or a small group of people can really generate enough income on walking tours to support as an income base. And so like we've never seen somebody try and copy quote our tours, particularly the walking tours. Um, so, we're fortunate. I mean, our friends in Boston, for example, it's just a much bigger city. There's a lot more people looking for tours of the Freedom Trail and so forth. So, they compete with the people who are dressed up as Ben Franklin or whatever. And because they're like, you're an individual guy and you can just give tours every day dressed as Ben Franklin, and you can probably make decent couple of bucks off of that. It's not quite the same here in Buffalo. Um, so where does my expertise lie? So I think that part of it is more the certainly the personal relationships and just to give a good example. So even though we have grown from 30 some volunteers that we started with to over 200 some today, I know all of their names. When I see them at the summer picnic, um, I know them. They, even if they're not wearing a lanyard and people are surprised by this, they're like, oh, you remember my name? It's like, yes, I do remember your name. And that means so much to people. Sometimes not all of them, but many of them, I remember their spouse or their kids or things like that. Something that's been, my staff loves me for this, but every year the staff do holiday cards to every single Explore Buffalo volunteer that all of us sign, and that is, over 200 cards that each of us sign every single year. And I can tell you that we get more positive feedback about those Christmas cards than from our volunteers than any of the other, the summer picnic or whatever. But the fact that like all of our employees take the time to sign each of these cards means so much to our volunteers. So, those personal relationships, I think, is and building that and reinforcing that is one of my strengths. My understanding and familiarity with Buffalo. I mean, I love Buffalo. I love its history, and I've been doing this for 12 years. So I think that's a piece of it, as well as a sense of our audience and um, knowing what our audience is going to pay for, is going to come to, and what is they're going to be interested in. Their audience doesn't surprise me sometimes. Sometimes they do, but usually I have a pretty good sense, a good read on what that will look like. But I think, again, really the most important piece is that appreciation and relationship building for me. So, um, and I think another, I put this here at the end, is to take care of yourself if that is something you are doing, is to, start a nonprofit or work for a nonprofit. It is really easy to burn yourself out and be so committed to the work and the mission and the purpose, to believe in it so much that, oh, I couldn't possibly take a day off or a week off in the summer, for us, things like that. So, and certainly I lived that. I did that for years, but I have over time. Admittedly, the pandemic was somewhat helpful with this too, to kind of step away for a day. Vacations are easier here. To explore Buffalo, especially in the sort of off-season fall and so on. But for example, yesterday was a beautiful day. I didn't have any meetings on my calendar. I didn't have any deadlines. I took the day off, and it was great. And I had a bunch of emails to answer this morning. When I came back, I answered them all, and we've moved on. And it was very relaxing, and I needed the day off more than I think I knew I did. So like I said, take a day off, take many days off throughout the year. So what did I learn in college that benefited the work? So I think some of the most important things I learned at UB related to sort of those community connections. So I was a TA, a teaching assistant in the Honors College and Colloquium when it was a surface learning program. So we had the students doing doing service learning in the city of Buffalo. That was really helpful to sort of make some connections and within the community that benefited as I got this started. Some of the internships that I did, so I did an internship in Senator Schumer's office, for example, which among other things made me realize I really didn't want to go into government politics, but did give me certainly a great understanding, a great insight into more of like how government and politics and just the community works. I would say that for me, the things that I learned in college that benefit what I do today were much more the outside the classroom experiences. So the internships and TA and service learning and things like that. Wonderful classes, of course, but certainly for me, as far as what I have found to be most helpful, has been the things I did outside the classroom. There were academic programs, but were outside of the classroom. So those are all the slides that I had. I know I went a little bit over time, so sorry about that. And if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer those. If anyone does, want to ask, other questions, longer questions, my email I'll just put in the chat is just brad@explorebuffalo.org. We try to keep it simple. So feel free to email me as well if you have questions about anything that I've talked about or about Explore Buffalo in general. So that wraps things up, and it's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to host you tonight, and it's a pleasure to see that so many students are really engaged with what you had to say in your presentation, and we'd love to have you again. So thank you so much for tonight.
Yes, my pleasure, and everybody enjoy the rest of the spring semester, and good luck with finals and final projects and all that good stuff. So.
Thank you. It means a lot. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks.